Welcome to Celebrity Interviews with Paul. I have with me today Emily Cloyd. It is a joy to be with you. Emily is, I have to read it off here so I get it right. She is the director for the American Association for the Advancement of Science Center for Public Engagement. She also grew up at Lutheran Church of the Master and was in high school youth group when I was an intern back at the 90s. So welcome, Emily. It's so cool to talk to you as this professional who's done all these amazing things.
Thank you.
Well, welcome today. How is life? You're in Washington, D.C. How's life in the pandemic in the District of Columbia?
It's better today. The temperatures got up to the high 50s, so I just got back from going for a walk around the neighborhood. Much nicer than the sleet we had yesterday and sort of every day for the last week.
Okay, good. Well, you're working on a project right now where you engage scientists and the science they do and religious dialogue, which is a wonderful thing. We need more of that, I think, going on. So what kind of disciplines do you work with and what does that look like?
Yeah, we work with scientists from all different kinds of backgrounds. I would say we often get a lot of scientists who are working in things like astronomy, climate change, biologists who work on topics like evolution. But we also get a lot of scientists who are looking at medical issues, so both doctors and then people who are doing research on disease, kind of the whole spectrum, really.
And how do you pull the religion side into that conversation? How does that happen?
Yeah, so AAAS actually has a program called the Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion that has relationships with seminaries, with rabbinical schools, with a wide variety of different religious organizations. And so they've been building these relationships up for decades and really building trust between the scientific community, the religious community, and highlighting the fact that there aren't actually that many barriers. I think there's a lot of kind of preconceived notions about, this sort of competition or combat between science and religion, but really just highlighting that there are so many areas where those groups work together. And of course, most people in America are people of faith. So it's not like there's this, wall or divide. We're all, or many of us are people of faith. Right.
So, and I actually have an uncle who's a retired chemistry professor at University of New Mexico, who's a very faithful man who wants to see those kind of conversations happen. So where do you see the most fruit in those kind of conversations? Where do you see the most exciting dialogues taking place and where people really kind of make connections and do things?
Yeah, I think one of the places where I've been the most active is in the climate change space. So that's been where I've been working for the past couple decades. And I think there's a lot of lessons that I heard growing up, things about caring for creation, about being responsible stewards of the earth that really align well with why I became a climate scientist, with the kinds of messages that I'm now working with the scientific community to bring about the importance of taking action. So I think there's a lot of dialogue happening there. And I've been part of conversations with groups like Interfaith Power and Light, which is working on how churches and other communities of faith can cut their own emissions of carbon, how they can be more responsible stewards and help reduce climate change, take action on climate change. I've worked with...
Fun fact, Lutheran Church of the Master is part of Interfaith Power and Light. And we actually had an energy audit done, and we found a program through Michigan where we were able to replace all of our traditional kind of lighting with LEDs and reduce our carbon footprint, reduce our energy costs, and finance it with an interest-free 5-year loan. It was amazing.
Oh, that is amazing.
Yeah, it was great. It was like we almost saved money by doing it. And by the time 5 years are up, which we're already into, we will see all that savings realized.
Yeah.
Pretty phenomenal. Yeah. Excellent. What so those are the places, and it's amazing to think, like I was going to ask you what brought you to this work, and you're like, it sounds like the grounding of conversations around creation and your growing up in faith helped to bring all that to bear. That's a pretty amazing thing.
Yeah, well, and actually I have kind of a funny story of when I was a kid at LCM, in my smart aleckness that many, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds have. I went to Pastor Tom one morning and I said, we're learning about dinosaurs in school, and dinosaurs lived 65 million years ago. There was all this time, but the Bible says that the earth was created in 7 days. And when was the time for the dinosaurs to live all this time? And, and recognizing that I was, an 8 or a 9-year-old and was not really in for lengthy theological discussions, Pastor Tom said, God is all powerful and can make a day as long as God would like. And, as an 8 or 9-year-old, he was very serious in answering me, but was also really thinking about how to encourage me in my faith without discouraging me from pursuing things like science.
Right, to create space for both to be able to exist. I think that's the big kind of strange animosity, and I wonder sometimes if part of the problem is who gets to do the messaging and who gets to speak for the Christians. Because there's a lot of deeply faithful people who believe very much in science. Many of them are colleagues of mine and ordained clergy and so forth, and understand these kinds of realities. And it is kind of interesting the way our country has evolved in such a way, and who has been allowed to be the voice for Christendom in the United States, and how we manage to maybe reclaim some of that space.
Yeah, and I think there's space in the conversation for many different perspectives, many people who are coming from, different ways of thinking about these issues, who are bringing a science background, who are bringing a faith background, oftentimes bringing both. But it is, as you said in verse 10, it's not a shouting match.
Right. Now, is America in some ways is an outlier in the climate change conversation, right? And I mean, globally, people understand that this is a reality that we're going to have to deal with.
Yeah, and I think actually many Americans, if you ask most Americans, they'll say, yes, climate change is happening. We think this is something that is affecting the country as a whole, but oftentimes people will say it's really affecting people who don't live where I live. It's affecting people who live down in Florida along the coast, and they're having hurricanes or sea level rise. It's affecting people out west in California where they're having fires. It's not affecting me here in Michigan, let's say. And so it's not so much that people aren't really understanding the science of climate change or thinking about the fact that it's happening. It's just they don't necessarily see that it's happening where they live.
Right. So it's in some ways too, and therefore in some ways too subtle, and then we can ignore it. So I guess that's the other question is, in the midst of all the extreme weather and what we've seen in Texas recently and the fires in California and the weirdness of the weather in Michigan, and everybody can agree that the winters are much more mild in Southeast Michigan than they used to be. Are there hopeful stories other than like fighting over which kind of light bulbs we should install and those sorts of things?
Yeah, there are actually a lot of really hopeful stories. And one of the projects that I've worked on over the last few years at AAAS is called How We Respond. And it's actually looking for and sharing stories from across the country of communities where scientists have worked together with community leaders, with residents, different community organizations to find the solutions, find the responses to climate change. So some of those stories are things like what you mentioned, the energy consults for churches, so that they can look at how are they using energy, what the options might be for solar panels or wind power, for using more energy, light or building materials. Some of the stories are things like in Marquette, Michigan, where they've been thinking about how climate change might affect the health of residents. So Marquette is a place where people want to retire there. It's sort of a retirement destination, but obviously people also live there throughout their working lives. And it's a growing community, and they're worried about, are they going to have enough health care? Are they going to have the hospitals they need? How are they going to meet people's needs for continuing care? And so they're thinking about not just how climate change will affect Marquette, but they're also thinking about how all these other things will affect this changing community. And that's really the important message as we think about climate change, is it's not something separate, but it's sort of on top of or in addition to all of these other changes that we're going through as a country or as a community. And it's really just a part of really responsible planning for the future.
So how do we integrate all of these things? How do we do this responsibly? How do we do it in a way that that does care for the planet? Because ultimately, we all would like to have a cleaner air and cleaner water, and we would like, generations to come to be able to exist on this planet and have fruitful, full lives. What about like right now? What could I do? What can we do? What can people in their own lives do? Your top three, top five, whatever things that we can do in our lives to have a biggest impact.
Yeah, I think the number one thing that we can do is actually talk with our friends and family members about climate change. So although, as I noted earlier, most Americans say, yes, climate change is happening, they don't necessarily talk about it with their friends and family. They don't hear stories in the news media about it. They don't seek out information. And so that makes us think that, it's not something that our friends or family care about or our friends and family believe is happening. So just having those conversations doesn't have to be a scary conversation. Oftentimes when I'm talking with people about climate change, it might just be, I'm out on a bike ride with some friends, and, we're talking about the fact that we're out here taking a ride around looking at the cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C. in March instead of April, which is,
right.
We've seen this shift of a couple weeks when the cherry blossoms are at their peak in Washington, D.C. Just sort of having that be a part of everyday conversation is really important, because it signals that it's something that I care about. It signals that it's something that my friends or family care about. And it opens the door for the conversation to be a conversation and not this sort of combative, do you believe this or do you believe that about climate change?
Right.
So I think that's really the first and biggest thing people can do, is just talk about it. And, if you have questions, seek out information from sources like AAAS, sources like the National Climate Assessment. The next thing people can do is just think about what in their community they can be a part of with that conversation. So like I mentioned, in Marquette, they're making this plan for how do they continue to have a healthy community. Most cities around the country are having similar conversations. So the city planners might be, having the 20-year plan come up, and so they'll have public meetings. So take part in those meetings, talk about the things that are important to you, be a part of your community, make those connections with your neighbors, and say, this is something that's important to me. If you're a member of a church, have that discussion in the church and say, are we doing an energy audit? Are we thinking about how we can reduce our own emissions? And you can do those sorts of energy audits for your own house. You can think about, are you using coal-fired power that you're getting from the power company? Are you using wind power or solar power? That information is available from your utility company. And you can also choose through your utility company to get more solar power, more wind power. And so the lines that come to your house don't change, but you can actually get your power company to buy more of those renewable energy sources by basically buying your allotment of energy from 100% wind or 100% solar, let's say.
That's cool. Yeah, yeah. Of course, I'm pushing a rock up a hill because I have teenage boys who discovered Christmas lights and LED lights in their room, which seem to go 24/7. In fact, one of my children put so many lights in his room that all of a sudden it started tripping the GFI switch. My wife used her hair dryer, so
Yeah.
I'm like, what changed? But yeah, but that's amazing to think that we can choose where our power comes from, which is fascinating. Even if you don't put solar panels on your roof and a battery in the basement, you can still have an impact in that way. And
Yeah.
And you got a number 3 for me?
Yeah, I would say number 3, look at the other choices that you're making in your life about where your food is coming from. So, a lot of times you might hear something like, oh, well, you need to cut all beef, all dairy out of your diet. You don't have to make such a giant change. Maybe one day a week you think about, okay, I'm not going to eat meat on Mondays, or I'm going to eat, a couple vegan meals rather than, you don't have to completely change your diet, but you can make some choices. And over time for your family, those really add up. And you can also make choices about things like, the cars that you're driving. Are you using a gas powered vehicle? Are you using an electric vehicle that you're powering using, that solar panel or the wind power that you're buying from the grid? Do you actually have solar panels on your house?
Right.
Are you using a hybrid vehicle? I know for me, I don't live somewhere where I have a place that I could plug in an electric vehicle. So I drive a hybrid that, allows me to save some gas. It doesn't save all the gas, but, it's a step to get us there. And it's much better to take 1 or 2 steps than to just say, I can't do anything, so I'm just going to wait it out.
Right. Excellent. Excellent. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to look at where our energy comes from. We're going to evaluate that, and we're going to find things like even just going vegetarian a day a week to have an impact.
Yeah.
And the one that always gets me is when you buy the blueberries in Michigan in January and realize they're coming from Chile, or and I don't even want to think about what took it to get them there. So
yeah, but there's so many good local produce that you can get, during the summer. You can get Michigan blueberries, you can get apples, cherries, all grown in the state of Michigan.
Sure.
And you can do your own preserving. So, buy the blueberries when they're cheap and throw a couple gallon bags in the freezer. And then you've got blueberries all winter.
There you go. Excellent. Well, Emily, where do you find joy these days?
Oh, I think I find joy in these kinds of conversations, getting to reconnect with people that maybe I haven't been really well connected with for a while. Finding new things to talk about and finding old friends and rekindling those relationships. The other thing that I'm really excited about is during the pandemic, my parents moved to the area. So Dave and Sally Cloyd had, obviously been members of LCM back when I was also there. But they had lived in Tennessee for a while, but now they live near me in the DC area. And although because of the pandemic, we don't get to hang out a whole lot, we're, taking precautions just like many people are of, we might get together, have a meal outside, wear masks, go for walks. It's great to see one another. I'm looking forward to when we can hang out and inside without masks. That day hasn't come yet, but one day it will. But it's really nice to have them nearby.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good. Well, thank you so much for being part of the conversation. And thank you also for all the work that you do. It's important work, and we need those voices to be shared in this world. So thank you for all you do. Blessings to you, and take care. Thank you for being part of Celebrity Interviews with Paul.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely.